The first paper will be presented to us by Luís Gonçalves Ferreira. You can come here. Who comes from the University of Minho, my university also, from the north of Portugal, and is going to give us a paper entitled Paid with Textiles and Garments, the Wages of the Workers of Portuguese Misericórdias, and he will explain what is Misericórdia, between the 16th and 18th century. Thank you very much, Luís. Go ahead.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you all for your presence. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to discuss with you part of the results of my master's research that I completed at the University of Minho in 2019. First of all, I would like to thank Angela and Joanna and Catherine too for your job and this opportunity to be here with you to discuss. EuroWeb has been very important for my development as a researcher, a young researcher. I'm a PhD student in University of Minho right now, and I'm working on clothing of the poor in the 7th and 18th century. But this paper aims to problematize the wages in clothing and accessories paid by Misericórdias to their employees during early modern age in Portugal. My research is focused on the case of the Holy Mercy Santa Casa of Braga, a city in the north of continental Portugal between 1650 and 1750. My exposition will be made in three moments. The first one, where I will briefly introduce Misericórdias, the Holy House of Mercy in English, in the poor relief system of Portugal in the early modern period. The second one, where I will dedicate attention to the methodology, the sources, and the investigative context of this problem. And the third one, where I will present the main research findings. Then, the first Brotherhood of Misericordia was set up in Lisbon in 1498 in the cathedral cloisters under the protection of the regent Leonor de Lencastre, sister of King Manuel I. This brotherhood was set up by secular people brought together with the aim of observing the 14 works of mercy. The institution received a royal commitment in Portuguese compromisso that established the rules for the functioning of its administrative bodies. Various privileges were granted to its brotherhood, such as tax exemptions and excuses from carrying out municipal functions, with the object of attracting leaders and facilitating the brotherhood's action in urban contexts. The Misericordia was managed by a board, mesa, in Portuguese, composed by 13 brothers and led by a provider, elected annually on St. Elizabeth's Day, 2nd of July. Its members, half noble and half craft workers, craftsmen, should have a certain moral, social, and ethno-religious profile.
Yes, I can hear you. Good afternoon.
In addition to these characteristics, they were required to have a minimum level of financial income that would allow them to assume pro bono management positions. The success of Misericórdias was rapid, and their diffusion was motivated by the king, who recommended themselves the foundation of brotherhoods like those in the capital to all his domains. These brotherhoods were managed by the Compromisso of Misericordia of Lisbon, the first one, which the king had to confirm and received privilege like those granted to the brothers of that first Misericordia in main capital. This monarchy's efforts succeeded. 77 brotherhoods were founded during the monarch's reign, and between 1522 and 1580, 132 were headed. As their operation depended on royal authorization, they were an important resource of articulation between the central power, personalized by the king, and the peripheries, as the governing bodies were formed by the power elites. The Misericórdias fully extended their economic and political power from the second half of the 16th century. The Council of Trent confirmed the dogma of purgatory and the importance of charity for the salvation of souls. During this period, the Misericórdias began to administer large hospitals, taking on important functions in the domain of health, as happened in Lisbon from 1564, when the management of the Hospital de Todos os Santos, that we can see in this painting, has given to the Santa Casa. The foundation of Misericórdias reinforced the characteristic mark of the charity and poor relief system in Portugal, its secularization. Contrary to the other Catholic and Protestant European countries, the poor relief system was organized with efforts of private individuals who integrated the administrative bodies and managed the funds of the legacies administered. The financial resources which paid for these services resulted from the hill of private founders, and these had at their disposal part or all of their mobile and immobile patrimony to save their souls and consequently to assist the poor. The monarchy power oversaw the most important institutions such as the royal hospitals and the Misericórdias in the main cities of the kingdom and empire. As a result of the process of establishing, expanding, and increasing bureaucracy of these institutions, there was a growing need to hire employees to support the institution in the tasks to be carried out. In practically all of the Portuguese Misericórdias, part of the salary of these men and women was paid in clothing that included garments, footwear, and hats, or money to buy them. The main characteristic of the Misericórdias' commitment to their employees passed through the assurance that they present themselves in a dignified manner, being called blue servants or blue men, given the type of textiles dyed in this color. The association of the blue to the Misericórdias was strong, and it derived from the primordial evocation to the Virgin Mary that we see in the first painting on my first slide. Also, these brothers dressed costumes, in Portuguese, balandraus, in this color in solemn acts of public nature, as processions or funeral accompaniments. And Raphael Bluteau, in his vocabulary published in the first quarter of the 18th century, reflects this when he affirms that servants of the blue are called in the house of Misericordia to the some man with a blue cloak who carried out the ordinary obligations of the house. The association of certain brotherhoods with certain colors related to the scent of their invocation was visible in the cities of the early modern Portugal in the great processions as Corpus Christi. Color and other stereotypical elements of dress allowed people to be identified and objectively extended the symbolic power of the institution. The payment of work with material goods, such as footwear and clothes, was common practice in various institutions, such as other brotherhoods, hospitals, convents, or noble houses in Portugal. This gift economy kept the social bodies of the ancien regime aggregated because it made visible the relations of interdependency, hierarchy, and service between poles with distinct levels of power. Giving also indicated affections and relations of proximity between the living and the dead. There are numerous no-will practice with which the dead offers to his personal goods to family members, friends, employees, servants, slaves, and poor. Then, As you can say, as part of my dissertation, I researched the documentation of Santa Casa da Misericórdia of Braga with the object of debate, a large theme, the appearance of poverty assisted by Portuguese Misericórdias. I developed a case study for the city of Braga for the chronology between 1645 and 1747. I problematized the range of transferences, alms, and wages between rich and poor under the umbrella of the third corporal work of mercy, clothing the naked. Yesterday I have another slide here, but I noticed in the guided tour that Angela made this relation between my master theme and our poster of this conference, and I put here this image because we can see exactly clothing the naked in this painting, because we can see a rich giving textiles to the poor. Then manuscript documents were consulted, namely Book of Acts or Terms of Mesa, something like this. That is the decisions of the institution's administrative body, the board, and the books of receipts and expenses. These mixed things without teams. I need to check all the clothing and other things here. I analyzed the clothing compensations paid by the Santa Casa of Braga to its employees. The fundamental documental core that allowed me to know this practice was constituted with the expenses of the institutions where it was registered with variable detail when and how these payments were distributed. The documentation was worked on by a non-probabilistic sample every 5 years. I used the mixed methodology. Of all the expenses recorded for clothing in this institution, 37% went to acquisition of clothing for the employees. Together with vestiarias, annual amounts spent to buy cloth and pay for the making of new clothes for the poor, this item takes a majority position among the 4 analyzed in my master dissertation. On 20 June of 1706, the board decided to suspend the large annual amounts for dressing the poor in order to be able to respond to increased expenses of the hospital. As we can see in figure 2, this one, this decision changes the configuration of clothing expenses. For this moment on, salaries become, from a nominal point of view, the main receivers of the values expended on clothing by the institution. The structure of the relations between the institution and its employees, based on annual or biannual provisions, justify that the most of the expenses with clothing took place in June, the month with each administrative year of the Santa Casa ended. It was at the end of the year that clothing was paid for, elements that had a great impact on the expenses because they represented normally high values. The replacement of shoes, soles, stocking, and hats was mainly located in the months of December to February. The old clothes repairs were spread all over the months, which justifies the structure of this figure. From the 11th century until the end of the 18th century, Braga was a city governed by the Archbishop and was part of an extensive ecclesiastic manor. The manor of Braga corresponded to an extensive, fertile, and densely populated region. The population of Braga in the 1750 was 16,000 inhabitants. Since 1640, the population was grown 26%. The large charity institution in the city in the 18th century was the Misericórdia, founded in the beginning of 16th century under the protection and with the benefit of this Archbishop Dom Diogo de Souza. The institution remained underfunded and suffered some implementation difficulties throughout the first half of the 16th century, surviving above all from charity appeals and alms. It was with the integration of the São Marcos Hospital into Misericórdia in 1559 that the social and economic importance of the institution in the city was restricted. The donations received and the economic power of the institution increased. As we said, the Portuguese Misericórdias had numerous employees. The three main lines of action of these men and women at the service of Santa Casa of Braga were fixed around the tasks related to the cult, service of the house and hospital practice. As the hospital of São Marcos was administered autonomously, the results of our study concerned a group of employees in charge of the house service and those who also carried out their occupations in the institution's church opening and closing its doors, dealing with cleaning, helping in the divine services, in divine service as sacristans. There were also women who helped in the begging and other public services. The typologies of clothing paid for by Misericórdia covered a large diversity than those established in the compromise. The payment was integrating the alterations resulting from the fashion process, as denoted by the presence of roupetas and vestias. Thus, the Holy House, the Santa Casa, also gave breeches and stockings. The quite substantial number of shoes paid for every 6 months and their components constitutes one of the major differences between almsgiving and wage payment practice. These results may justify the great number of shoemakers among the Braga population, in addition to their strong presence among the Misericórdia brothers, above all during the 16th century. The footwear that is preserved from the period of artisanal production, 17th and 18th centuries, reveals a tendency for rapid wearing, giving the poor resistance of the soles and upper components of the shoe. The Santa Casa frequently recurred to tailors to renovate or repair the clothing of the employees. The tailors also opened buttonholes, adorning them, and their major functioning was to transform the fabric as two-dimensional element into a three-dimensional structure. The large quantity of buttons, more than 800, and the payment for the buttonholes are related to the manufacturing of tight clothes, as we heard yesterday, which could be worn by the upper and lower parts of body. In the case of the employees of Misericórdia, the buttonholes were usually made by twist silk yarn. Line garments also increased the manufacturing costs of these garments. Another disparity between the alms and the clothing of the employees is the expressiveness of the head coverings like hats and barretes and their various elements. We submit the garments to the model we conceptualized in our dissertation, the line of center and the line of metamorphosis, our designation to these lines. This model divides the body into artificial lines. In the relation to the upper and lower body, we highlight the enormous relevance, as you can see, of the elements destined for the lower body, to the legs. In this case, it's important to correlate these results with the nature of the employees' functions and their condition as workers. The items of clothing transferred by the Santa Casa to its employees were mainly for outerwear, as we can see. The small number of undergarments, only one shirt, indicates exactly that the institution was not concerned with things like hygiene of the employees. Fabrics represented nearly 75% of nominal value of the clothes given to the poor. It is therefore relevant, relevant that we look at fabrics. We have seen that in the letter of compromise and statutes, the wage earners wear blue cloth dresses. The economic and cultural frameworks of early modern age devalued coarse fabrics and valued fine textiles. The thickness of the yarn had an impact of lightness, transparency, dyeing capacity, and the nominal value of the fabric. As thinner the yarn was, the higher the concentration of raw material per unit of measure. Dense and luminous colors were valued obtained from a great ability in the selection and mixture of pigment, as we all know, and other elements responsible for giving nuances, tones, etc. Table 1 shows that several dyed wools like Serafina, cloth of Estremoz, Saragossa, and Pano Fino were bought for the composition of linings and for the exteriors of the garments. Pano Fino, cloth, Pano Fino, Saragossa, cloth of Estremoz, Serafinas, Tamanha, cloth of Covilhã, and Baeta are all woolen textiles. Estopa and Hollandilha are types of coarse flax. The word cloth designates in general terms, as I know, a textile made of warp and weft wool with different levels of care in the phases of preparing, spinning, weaving, and finishing. They could or not be dyed, but the common denominator of all of these is air and water permeability, low wet conduction, and good capacity to receive pigments. For example, how can we get more details about the cloths of Estremoz and Covilhã? We know that the Covilhã cloth was more expensive. Covilhã is a city in Portugal, Estremoz too. It's important to say it. Covilhã cloth was more expensive than one commonly used in the cloth of the servants. And we know that because in 1712, the official treasurer justifies the 24,000 reis that he gave for the price of the cloth to the servant João Monteiro. Rafael Bouteau refers that the cloth from Covilhã had 22,200 wool yarns in the warp. From the Regimento dos Panos of Dom Pedro II, we know that the cloth of these characteristics occupied the top of the rank of woolen textiles, woolen Portuguese textiles, because the wool selected comes from the noblest part of the ship. According to the same classification, the cloth of Estremoz was the lowest quality Portuguese textile cloth. We can approximate the economic and social value of the woolen fabrics in this table too. That results the confrontation between the vocabulary and the regiment of Dom Pedro II. Saragossa was a type of baeta, and according to the regiment of Dom Pedro II, its raw material came from a medium quality wool. Baetas were woolen cloths with plain structure, therefore resistant and stiff, and could be dyed in various colors. Saragossa was priced higher than Estremoz cloth and lower than Pano cloth. As final remarks, we can say that the salary employees received more diversified clothing from the Santa Casa than the charity poor. Their clothing included elements of adornment such as silver medals, hats, shoes, stockings, body garments, and cloaks. The fabrics that composed them were commonly dyed and of good quality, comparing to the poor, to the almsgiving. The institution took regular care of its employees' image, repairing and arranging their clothing, hats and shoes, opting for lined and buttoned garments. For this purpose, Misericordia hired tailors, hat makers, and shoemakers inside the urban market. The Misericordia of Braga treated the poor and the workers differently. For the former, the Santa Casa preferred coarse textiles made with less noble wools. However, these fabrics were more appropriate for making more resistant, stable, and waterproof garments. Misericordias gave to his employees dyed textiles of better quality made for finer fabrics. Misericordia ensured that good reputation by regularly giving them hats and shoes. And this practice included spending on the renewal of clothing, the long life journey of a garment in society. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luís. Oh, okay.
I tried. Yeah.
Does anyone have questions or comments for Luís? Okay, I'll start with that. We also have one question.
Thank you for your presentation, Luís. I would like to ask about if the workers of the Casa La Misericordia were paid with other products, or if it's possible to know if they rejected to be paid in clothes and wanted other forms of payment.
Thank you for your question. They received food, clothing, normally clothing and shoes and hats, and sometimes a compensation in money too, or money to buy all of these items, food included. It's when you talk about Misericordias, we talk about a large type of institutions with different levels of complexity, and it reflects in their structure. When you think about Misericordia of Lisbon, the main capital, it's mandatory to talk about a structure different than Misericordia in the small town in Alentejo or in Trás-os-Montes, in the interior, in rural areas. Because this discussion, this data, is based mainly in the larger institutions, the results of the larger institutions as Braga, Porto, Lisbon, Coimbra, Évora, because the scholars studied these institutions and their documentation. It's a point of view of urban context. And in Portugal, in early modern period, it's difficult to study rural areas, Misericordias included. I don't know if I answered you.
It's really almost the same question, or maybe a follow-up, because what's the share then of textiles in the wages? I mean, of course, it's hard. I know it's hard to say because we don't know the value, but if you had like a sense of if it's like a larger part or a smaller part. And then I was wondering, would it be possible, theoretically at least, to compare the wages in the Misericordia with, like, let's say, urban textile wages? Mm-hmm. Just find it very interesting. There's a lot of discussion about wages these days, right? And how they were paid, and what does it say about the economy, and and often it's done in grain, right? And I think at the back of my head, the question is how important really are grain or food wages in comparison to textile wages? Mm-hmm. Maybe you can say something on that.
Okay. Well, I have... Yes, because it's necessary to compare go to the sources and compare with another the Misericórdias in another brotherhoods or another institutions. In Portugal, we have a colleague that studies Misericórdias in this with economic methodology, and probably could answer this question. She could produce investigation to answer your question in the future, I hope. But it's very important, because also we know that the other institutions as noble houses paid their the wages to their servants in clothing, but we don't know more. Yeah. It's a little. We don't have data yet, but I hope in the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to pass to Spyros.
Thank you, Luís. Just to ask you a question, if this is something you had found only in Misericórdias, or it is something general in Portugal of that period of time?
Mm-hmm.
Have you any idea about that?
Yes, it's general. Braga had in 18th century 70 to 80 brotherhoods, confraternities, dense network of these institutions, these religious institutions, and then most of them pay wages in clothing, in food, noble houses too, hospitals too. I am studying right now the hospital of Todos os Santos, the royal hospital that we saw in that painting, and the system of payment is it's similar. It could be transformed in a money compensation if the employee needs the money to other thing. For example, they could request to the board or to the responsible of this money to saying, I am too poor, my wife blah 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 blah, and I need the money to buy food, for example, or to deal with another problem of another vulnerability of survivance. And then, because these employees were in Misericórdias poor too, they need to be poor to be admitted as servants of the. It's a detail important, because in this it's because of this detail that I considered these wages in my clothing the naked umbrella, my study, because they are to be poor too.
Because it was the next question I would ask you, if these kind of jobs were attractive, and you gave me just before the answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there more questions? Well, I have one, and it goes with the conversation, the private conversation we were having during coffee break, and we were talking about how black was in fashion and how it was associated to austerity, dignity, power, and authority, and that's why lawyers, you were mentioning, they still use black clothes. Those academic clothes are also black, but at a certain point, I recall hearing Pastor talking about these, and I think it's a change that took place in the military clothes, uniforms. The marine blue took the place of black as a symbol of authority.
Okay.
So that's why cops use blue nowadays. The military uniforms are also blue marine, and I saw that your workers, not your workers, but the Misericordia workers, when you have...
My workers.
when you have information about the color, it's blue, and you talk about the blue cloak worker. So I was wondering, and it seems to me that the Misericórdias were very interested in preserving the image of the workers, and you told that. Were they choosing blue at this time because it was already associated to some kind of authority? What do you think? Why it is blue?
Yes. I think that this painting answers you, because the Virgin Mary in the Catholic theology, confirmed by the Council of Trent, it's like intermediative, I don't know if, between this world, the world of living, and the world of if you pray to Virgin Mary, if you offer things to the Virgin Mary, you probably save your soul of the purgatory with them. And it's the same statue of Saint John Evangelist, Saint John, that they believe that if they pray to these two figures, could save their souls. I think that if we relate this data about the workers, about these cloaks, these costumes, and the other costume that the brothers, the elite, should use in the public demonstrations of power, like processions or funeral accompaniments of their brothers, they were also blue clothes. To associate, and then this memory of the color was so strong that Raphael Bluteau, in their vocabulary, in the entrance to blue, one of the first references is to Misericórdias. To answer you in an accurate way, in my data, in the poor clothing that I have been studying, the mourning clothes of the poor could be black or blue.
Now it's obvious, yes, Our Lady of Mercy.
Yeah.
So that's the color of the Virgin Mary, and so therefore it's the color of the Misericordia. Now it makes sense. And I'm remembering all the other documents that I saw referred to in articles, and now I understand why it is blue. So thank you very much. We had to come here to find out that. Are there more questions? Okay.
These uniforms remind me the uniforms of the Army of Salvation. They are also blue or black. And they are like policemen. You know the Army of Salvation in Anglo-Saxonic countries?
No.
I don't know if they are black or blue, the uniforms of Army of Salvation.
I don't know.
It's Googling, so, but it's dark. We don't know if it's marine blue.
We have the same idea of salvation, or for poor people, people disabled, and so on.
Yeah, probably.
Makes sense. Okay, it's a religious.
Some religious orders, like I am wondering about Saint John Order in Portugal, that was inspired in another one in Italy. They received the color of their habit from the Virgin Mary, and Virgin Mary was designated their costume of that order to be blue. Probably they don't hurt nothing to Virgin Mary, but it allows us to think in this dimension of the symbolic connection between the blue and this expression of holiness and this connection with the divine things.
So thank you very much. We are really on time. Thank you very much for your enlightening paper.